I would like to thank all our speakers for a wonderful discussion and moving on to our next session, that is Artificial Intelligence in Health Policy, a Global Perspective by Dr. Ruchi Das. Dr. Das is an award winning clinician and a highly valued public speaker. She has dedicated over a decade leading groundbreaking innovations to improve health outcomes and strengthen the health systems. Dr. Das is the managing director at Health Cursor Consulting Group and is regarded as one of the leading global innovators and business minds in the healthcare IT and analytics sector. She is celebrated for her roles as a thought leader, writer, researcher, and for her evangelism in the healthcare and pharma industry. Her writing focuses on technology, policy, health economics, and outcomes, commercialization of digital businesses, and translational research. Dr. Das influences public policy through advocacy and advises government, non government, and industry partners throughout the world on leveraging advanced digital technologies to transform healthcare delivery. She got recognized as one of the top 10 impactful technology leaders by Information Week. Recently, she was voted as one of the most influential women in health IT in the world by Fierce Healthcare. We would welcome Dr. Das, and I would hand over it to you.
So good morning, everybody from London. As we talk today about this important topic of artificial intelligence and health policy, the UK government yesterday has released international a dialogue and national standards on algorithmic transparency. It's one of the first of its kind in terms of algorithmic transparency and has been a great boost for developing public trust in artificial intelligence. Why we are even talking about artificial intelligence and policy in the same breath. You would realize that in the last few years, digital transformation has been led by artificial intelligence, and so much so that today, any of the large digital transformation project, it's impossible to lead it without the use of AI tools. A recent report that was published by Markets and Markets and Yahoo Finance says that digital transformation market is going to rise from 521 billion today to around 1270 billion by 2026, which is a CAGR growth of 19.1%. And hence, when there is this faster development and rollout of AI tools happening across the globe, and also especially in the healthcare industry, it is important that public policy is refined and defined on a continuous basis to build public trust. So artificial intelligence has now become the new edge, the new frontier of digital transformation. 95% member organization at 451 Alliance find artificial intelligence as foundational to their digital transformation efforts. This is due to the combination of AI, ML tools to analyze large scale of data and drive automation, insights, and predictions for the overall business to come. And 451 Alliance, just for those people who don't understand, is a member organization that talks and forecasts about IT and macroeconomic factors across industries. And by that, we come to a conclusion that digital transformation in the coming years will leverage a lot of artificial intelligence and advanced technologies and tools going forward. Now, when we talk about artificial intelligence, what are the factors because of which artificial intelligence has become so imperative to digital transformation efforts? So first is access to sophisticated, fast and cost-effective computing processing tools, hardware, software applications, availability of large, which is big data sets, and not just big, but continuous longitudinal data sets generated by digital efforts worldwide and technologies like Internet of Things. Availability of open source coding resources, user groups and the user know-how, online communities that are driving adoption of AI across the globe. I used to be a part of a big data analytics startup in healthcare, where we used to risk stratify population at large into cohorts of high, medium, and low risk, and then study patterns, correlations, and predict next disease prognosis, and even relapse and readmissions. And some of these tools then become very, very powerful for the preventative care as well, and to develop and design programs around outreach and intervention. However, when we talk about artificial intelligence, if you Google the World Wide Web, you will read a lot around risks. And I have put these risks under the four main buckets. There are data-related risks, which are about data quality. It's garbage in, garbage out. The second is AI ML attacks. So it's about data privacy, it's about model extraction, it's about adversarial inputs. Testing and trust, so mostly around transparency, and compliance, so legal and regulatory governance and process oversight. At the core of any artificial intelligence solution, there is something automated. And if it is opaque and doesn't give idea about how you reached this outcome or this analysis, that tends to create suspicion and doubt, especially for healthcare fraternity and healthcare industry people who are still gearing up to the challenge of learning more about digital health, artificial technologies in healthcare, however they are master at their skills. So how to mitigate those risks? And that's why policy frameworks and guiding principles and discussions around policy is very important. And there are some underlying factors because of which this risk still exists, and there are methods that are still designed and evolved to mitigate some of these risks. And one of them is regulation. There are very little concrete definitions around AI. The consensus around AI is very broadly worded, especially in policy discussions, that hampers regulatory access, approval, and intervention. Policy versus practice. So all of those who are attending this presentation today would understand that we have two sides of people. There are either AI enthusiasts and proponents like me, and then there are policymakers. And while we stress more on the usability of AI, the functionality of AI, and how it solves the day-to-day problems that we face today, right there in time, the policymakers are more concerned about the future use, misuse of artificial intelligence tools and systems, sometimes over-accentuating concern on its future use, which is detrimental to the adoption of AI. Human rights. So there is a lot of discussion. I've heard that in healthcare, I've heard it across industries, that it is going to affect humans in different ways. They can be threatened, there can be an AI arms race, it can replace jobs, and hence human right becomes a complementary addition to the policy framework thinking when we try and define a framework for implementation of AI. And last but not least is governance, more important in a healthcare industry. Over the years, healthcare industry has developed some very concrete processes and frameworks. And any fast deployment or development of AI tools can hamper some of such frameworks. So you need an overarching framework that can assess some of these changes and impact that come through, especially during the digital transformation phase, right, from strategy to execution, and see it in the light of regulations and healthcare frameworks to see the feasibility and also the amount of impact that it will cause, both negative and positive, and then go forward to it. So when we talk about recommendations for policy framework and implementation, the first thing we talk about is multi-stakeholder collaboration, so that we can look at AI tools from social, ethical, legal, regulatory, human rights, and organization fitment angle, and give the divide between policy and practice. There is an interesting paper written by David Brands on how today's CEO need to be equipped with digital skills if they want to move forward. BCG published a study that says 80% of companies last year fast-paced their digital transformation efforts, but 70% of them failed to reach the objective they have set for themselves. Another study, which talks about around 2,000 companies that involved digitally skilled and competent people, outperformed more than 48% in terms of revenue impact and market valuation. And this has been published in Sloan Management Review, which is available publicly. So what some of these things tell us is multi-stakeholder collaboration, education is very, very important for making sure that digital transformation efforts that are led by AI tools go smooth and reach the overall objective that they have set themselves for. The second is facilitating digitalization efforts and funding R&D efforts. So public and private sectors both should pool in money to make sure that R&D efforts are top-notch and there is a continuous efforts made in R&D. For digitalization efforts also, we have to provide equitable resources across regulatory as well as industry partners, and also incentivize them. And you can incentivize them as tax credits, and both profit and non-profit organizations should be encouraged to build research around evidence-based validation and transparency, and everything that is not transparent, opaque, discriminatory, or biased should be flagged out. Oversight management, this is the most important part when we talk about recommendations. Safety and efficacy of AI is contingent upon a very well thought out risk management strategy and process. And hence, right at the time of development, right at the time of design and deployment, you have to think of how are you going to handle certain risks and challenges and make sure that it comply to the overall AI guideline and framework in an ethical way, in a legal way, and to make meaningful impact to the organization as well as to the user. And then the top part of it, which is the structure, quality structure, an ideal AI quality structure should be explainable. So it should be transparent, it should be auditable, it should be human-centric, it should augment human capabilities. And at the same point in time, it should be there right at the time of design, deployment, as well as development. So when you talk about policy recommendation, these are the three things we always talk about: the education, the benchmarking and best practices, and the ethics and accountability. So in this room full of delegates, if I give technological resources to one half and education to another half, that uneven distribution will hamper the adoption of AI and access to AI resources equitably. So there is, for voluntary adoption and standard compliance, it is important that we facilitate efforts like we publish research studies, we publish best practices, we discuss some of these things across user groups. So companies like Microsoft, Accenture have joined partnerships for AI, where they discuss about researches and best practices and how to build forward and constantly engage, making some of these tools, models, and framework future ready and aware about future risks. So this clip looks like something from Grand Theft Auto. Everybody knows how to drive, but then we always look for a responsible driver. And that's why responsible AI is such a hot topic in policy discussions these days. There are some overarching principles that develop the responsible AI framework. It's a governance framework that makes sure that it delivers on the ethical and legal part, but also delivers on the human-centric organizational value, user centricity, and standard compliance part of it. So if you see this diagram that I've put across, adapted from the IT Tech Law 7 overarching principles of responsible AI, you would understand that AI has to make sense on 4 major parameters. One is explainability. How X was predicted and what was predicted. So if you get an output that this treatment is beneficial, how did the model reach that analysis? So can you explain the series of processes or analysis or data ingestion that led to this outcome? The second is fairness. The outcome that we have received, is it ethical? Is it equitable? Is it fair to all user groups, or is it biased or discriminatory towards one? A good example could be a health insurance company denying insurance to people who they feel would take a claim, or who are sick, or increase the premium of those people who do not follow their health parameters. So is it more biased or discriminatory rather than inclusive? That's the second parameter. The third is robustness. So how robust is the system? Can the model be fooled? Can the system be fooled? If I put in different set of data, or if I model or run it in a different way, will it give different results? So how robust is the system? And fourth is compliance. Does it comply to industry standards? Because good is what good does. And we often say this, what your eyes can't see, your brain doesn't know, doesn't exist. So it's about how to make sure that AI tools and systems delivers on all of those 4 parameters. And that's why we more and more talk about responsible AI to be the core of any policy recommendation around artificial intelligence policymaking. And in the end, I want to highlight a few drawbacks, a few ethical challenges, and how you can mitigate some of those challenges by taking certain implementation considerations in mind. So consider an AI black box, an opaque system where AI algorithms can run with massive amount of data that you're ingesting within the system. And it is a black box. So it is not explaining these predictions and decisions with reasons. So you can build transparency. So make a transparent design, an interpretable output, do your model inspections, do your outcome explanations, use what can be explained, and treat self-learning neural networks and solutions with utmost care. What if the algorithm is complex? So sometimes there is more emphasis on models to give smarter results than ethical results. So technical secrecy and complexity can be a deception. And I cannot stress on it more and more, but little understanding of skills around comprehending the algorithm, functional elements, modus operandi, and relationship across system can blind decision-making. So we need more and more people to rise up to the challenge, develop digital skills, create a well-aware workforce around AI to interpret and explicitly understand the AI models and their applications. So you run enough test cases and validate the results of AI over and over again before you put it to good use. Certain other problems like data quality challenges, especially in healthcare, we deal with no data, bad data, or noise. So if data collection is flawed and the algorithm is too narrow or subjective, it can provide very discriminatory, biased, or skewed results. So data set need to be sufficiently large and broad. The smaller the size of data set, it can lead to inaccurate or biased results. High quality data is essential to train an AI model. We all know that, but these need to get audited and should be prevented. And whenever there is a bias, it needs to be neutralized at the earliest. And then there are data privacy and cybersecurity issues. While you're introducing AI into data sets, systems, vulnerabilities can creep in, and that can lead to even data theft. So there are cyber intrusion risks, there are privacy risks, there are adversarial attacks, and hence we require stronger disclosure laws for every industry and for all firms to comply to data privacy, make sure that we have done impact assessments in terms of data protection already. Neural fuzzing can be used to test large amount of random input data with the software to look at its vulnerability. There is a company called Certify that provides certain practical tools that can look at, that can provide score and also look at vulnerabilities of systems and can give you details. So there are several such responsible AI companies that are outside providing practical tools so you can run it through them. And then you need to comply to certain, so in the UK, there are GDPR regulations. We have always heard about CCPA as well. So if you comply to global standards, you can make sure that there is accountability, there is disclosure, there are robust systems that can withstand adversarial effects, and then you can prevent data theft. That is the need of the hour. And all of these efforts put together will not only lead to great adoption of AI across the globe, but will also help policymakers to develop recommendations that do not form a bottleneck for practitioners to practice or doesn't stifle innovation, but help us to reap maximum benefits of AI while making sure that we are keeping the risks at check. So thank you so much, and I'm happy to take any questions if you have. For more information around what I talked about today, we have published a paper in Global Journal of Computer Science and Technology about artificial intelligence in health policy. And you can read more about how the privacy laws, the future of AI, and responsible AI are working in tandem with each other to draw cultural, data management, and technology shifts in the industry. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Das. Thank you so much for the session. It was great. And we have a question from the audience. The question is, any machine learning model is as good as the data it is trained on. So how can we ensure the data used for developing the AI solution is good enough to represent real world scenario? And how can policies help regulate this?
I think this is a very good question. As I said, it's garbage in, garbage out. So if you will put in a very small amount of data, I do not think that can bring in the kind of impact globally that we are looking for. However, it can solve some piecemeal problems, can give you some idea around it. The good thing about machine learning is that the data can improve as and when you ingest more data. And with the digitalization efforts happening globally, I think we will have access to more and large amount of data. In healthcare, we particularly look for, as a clinician, I particularly look for longitudinal data to derive insights and to make any predictions. So any small amount of data might not do that. But what we also do for certain small solutions is that we recreate the crime scene. So I'll explain that with an example. So for example, we have data of a person's prescription, and we have the discharge summary, and we have some fundamental details about the patient which are anonymized. We can, looking at the medicines and lab tests and other things, we can pretty much predict that, okay, this person would have been admitted for a urinary tract infection, would have been, advised this kind of stay, this kind of medication, and would have been discharged on this, and then, repopulate that data which is missing at this point in time. So by recreating a lot of data, by normalizing a lot of data, and then running it through machine learning system, a lot can still be achieved when we are struggling with very little amount of data. But as I mentioned earlier, the data set need to be very broad for any meaningful long-term outcome to come in.
Thank you so much for answering the question. And I think we will forward any more questions from audience to your email, and maybe you can answer those and we can put it in the chat box. Thank you so much for taking time out to speak at the summit. It was
Thank
great
you so
hearing.
much for such lovely sessions, and thank you for having me. Bye for
Thank
now.
you.